Flames ate the schoolhouse. They were hungry, merciless things, licking up the dry wooden walls of the Willow Springs schoolhouse like it was nothing more than kindling. Acrid smoke billowed in thick, choking clouds, a black monster obscuring Clara Harlow's vision. She hunched low, her lungs on fire, desperately searching for any sign of movement in the dancing, hellish shadows. "Lily!" she called out, but her voice was gone, just a raspy whisper lost in the roar of the inferno. "Thomas!" The schoolroom, once a place of order and learning, had become a nightmare of orange and black. Desks were overturned, books were pages of flame, and the careful world she had built was now pure chaos. A massive beam groaned overhead. It cracked, sending a shower of glowing sparks raining down. Clara threw her arms up to shield her face, feeling the sting as 100 tiny embers bit into her skin. And that's when she saw it, a flash of golden hair beneath a fallen cabinet. Lily Walsh. The little girl was curled on her side, her small body terrifyingly, unnaturally still. Clara didn't think, she just moved. She lunged forward, shoving aside burning debris with her bare hands. The pain was immediate, searing, but her mind didn't register it. All that mattered was the child. She reached Lily, scooped the small, limp body into her arms, and turned toward what had once been the doorway. But it was gone. A solid wall of flame erupted before her, a roaring beast blocking the only exit. The sudden surge of heat and light was a physical blow, and it paralyzed her. In that instant, Clara wasn't in Willow Springs anymore. She was 15 again, a girl frozen at the top of a staircase, watching fire consume her family home. She could hear her mother's screams echoing from the floor below. She could hear her father's drunken shouts, suddenly silenced by the roar. "No," Clara whispered, clutching Lily tighter, the sound lost to the fire. "Not again!" Her lungs burned, her vision narrowed to a pinprick. The past and the present were crashing together in a terrible kaleidoscope of fire and fear, and her legs refused to move, as if they were rooted to the burning floorboards. A small shape appeared through the smoke. It was Thomas Fletcher, coughing violently, his eyes wide with terror. He pulled at Clara's skirt, his mouth moving, but she couldn't hear him. The only sound was the thunder of her own heartbeat and the crackling of the flames that were about to claim her, just like they had claimed her family all those years ago. The boy tugged harder, desperately pointing toward a window, but Clara couldn't move. She was trapped in the nightmare that had haunted her for 18 years. Then the schoolhouse door didn't open. It exploded. It burst inward in a shower of splintering wood, and a man stood silhouetted against the daylight. Matthew Walsh. A bandana was pressed to his face, his eyes wild with a father's desperate determination. He took in the scene in a fraction of a second. Clara, frozen in place. Lily, unconscious in her arms. Thomas, tugging desperately at her skirt. "Clara!" Matthew's voice cut through the roar, through her paralysis, through the ghosts of the past. He charged forward, scooping Thomas up with one powerful arm while wrapping the other around Clara's shoulders. "Move!" he commanded, steering them toward the window. "Now!" The raw authority in his voice was the anchor she needed. It broke through her stupor, and she stumbled forward, following his lead. Glass shattered as Matthew kicked out the entire window frame. Fresh air rushed in, a brief, blessed relief from the smoke. "Give her to me!" Matthew shouted, reaching for his daughter. But Clara couldn't. Her arms had locked, her muscles seized in a protective rigor mortis. She couldn't let the child go. She couldn't fail another child in a fire. "Clara," Matthew said again, his voice softer now, but still urgent. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw not just fear, but a deep, grounding strength. "I've got her." Something in his gaze snapped her back to reality. Her arms unlocked. She surrendered Lily to her father, then helped a crying Thomas through the broken window before Matthew practically shoved her through the opening. They collapsed onto the grass outside just as the schoolhouse roof gave way behind them. It fell with a thunderous crash, sending a massive plume of fire and ash soaring toward the sky. In the chaos that followed, with the shouts of the townspeople and the hurried commands of the bucket brigade, Clara felt a strange detachment from her own body. She looked down at her hands, the hands she used to speak, to teach, to connect with the world. What she saw instead were raw, blistered masses of angry red flesh. The skin had bubbled and peeled away, exposing the vulnerable tissue beneath. Strange, she thought distantly. She felt nothing. Then the pain arrived. It came all at once, a tidal wave of agony that washed over her entire consciousness, threatening to pull her under. She tried to form her fingers into the sign for help, but they wouldn't obey. Her hands, her only voice when her throat could not speak, were ruined. The realization struck her harder than any physical pain. She looked up and met Matthew's gaze as he cradled Lily, who was just beginning to stir in his arms. And in that one moment of terrible clarity before the darkness claimed her, Clara understood with absolute certainty. Her hands would never speak again. The world faded to black. 6 months earlier, the stagecoach rattled into the town of Willow Springs, kicking up a cloud of dust. Clara Harlow stepped out, clutching her single carpet bag, her stomach a knot of nervous anticipation. This was it. A new town. A new life. A place where no one knew her name was really right. A place where no one knew about the fire. "Miss Harlow?" A tall, angular man in a minister's collar approached her. His name was Josiah Bennett, and his kind eyes seemed to see more than most. "Welcome to Willow Springs." Clara nodded, offering a small, tight smile. She shifted her bag, shook his hand, then briefly touched her throat and made a small gesture. It was her shorthand explanation. "I cannot speak well." "No need for explanation," Josiah said gently. "I received word from the orphanage. Your skills are what matter to us, not the sound of your voice." Relief washed over her. She pulled out a small notepad and pencil, her constant companions, and scribbled, "Thank you. I'm eager to see the school." As they walked down the main street, Clara felt the eyes on her. Storekeepers paused their work. Conversations hushed as she passed. The people of Willow Springs weren't just cautious, they were suspicious. "Don't mind them," Josiah said, as if reading her thoughts. "This town doesn't easily embrace strangers. They value their own." The schoolhouse stood apart from the town, a simple clapboard building with a bell tower that reached toward the wide-open sky. Josiah unlocked the heavy door and stepped aside. "It's yours now." Clara entered slowly. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room smelled of fresh-cut pine and chalk dust. It was clean, simple, and blessedly empty. It was a blank slate. "The town knows about my condition," she wrote on her pad. "They know you have difficulty speaking," Josiah confirmed. "I told them you were highly qualified, with excellent recommendations." He hesitated. "I also mentioned you have special teaching methods. I thought it best to let you demonstrate your approach in your own time, rather than invite preconceptions." That night, in her small rented room above the millinery shop, Clara opened her private, leather-bound notebook. Inside were pages of meticulous drawings, hands in different positions, each paired with words. It was her own language, a bridge she'd built over years of silence. She looked out the window. She could be just Miss Harlow here. Not Clara Wright, the mute survivor. Not the girl who lost her voice in the same fire that claimed her family. Not the daughter who should have warned them sooner. The next morning, she walked to the schoolhouse early and found Josiah standing by the creek, a handkerchief pressed to his mouth. When he pulled it away, she saw a fleck of red stain the white cloth. He tucked it away quickly. "Just the morning air," he said, but his eyes told a different story. "I wanted to speak with you about a particular student, Matthew Walsh's daughter, Lily." Clara raised an eyebrow. The name Walsh was already one she'd heard whispered with a mixture of awe and fear. He owned the largest cattle operation in the county, a man of immense wealth and influence. "Lily lost her hearing last winter after a bout of scarlet fever," Josiah explained. She was a bright child, but since the illness, she's completely withdrawn. She lives in a world of total silence. Clara's expression softened. She quickly wrote, I have experience with deaf children. I know, Josiah said. That's why I brought you here. Walsh has tried everything. Doctors in Cheyenne, a specialist from Denver. They all say her hearing is gone forever. He's a complicated man, Miss Harlow. Lost his wife shortly after Lily was born, and now this. I understand complicated men and complicated grief, Clara wrote, the words feeling heavier than the pencil in her hand. Josiah looked at her for a long moment. I expect you do, Miss Harlow. More than most. On the first day of school, the children eyed her with open curiosity. A freckled boy named Tommy Fletcher got straight to the point. Pa says you can't talk. Is that true? Before Clara could respond, an older girl elbowed him. Hush, Tommy! Ma says that's rude. Clara clapped her hands gently. She touched her throat, then wrote on her notepad for them all to see. I can speak, but very quietly. You must watch carefully and listen closely. Just then the schoolhouse door swung open. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood there, his presence filling the room. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes missed nothing. Behind him, clutching his hand, was a small girl with golden curls, her gaze fixed on the floor. The classroom fell silent. It was Matthew Walsh. Miss Harlow, he said, his voice a low rumble. Apologies for our tardiness. This is my daughter, Lily. Clara didn't write. She didn't try her weak whisper. She knelt down to the child's level, looked directly into her downcast face, and raised her hands. Slowly, clearly, she signed, Hello, Lily. I'm happy to meet you. The change was like a lightning strike. Lily's head snapped up. Her blue eyes, which had been dull and lifeless, widened in utter shock and wonder. She stared at Clara's moving hands, then at her face, then back at her hands as if she were witnessing a miracle. The entire classroom was silent. Matthew Walsh looked like he'd been turned to stone, his face a mask of disbelief and a sudden, desperate hope that was painful to watch. Clara signed again, slower this time. My name is Miss Harlow. What is your name? Lily took a hesitant step out from behind her father, her eyes locked on Clara's hands. She didn't know how to respond, but her entire body had transformed. She was no longer a withdrawn shell. She was a rapt audience. Clara looked up at Matthew. His stunned expression said it all. She hasn't reacted to anyone like that since. He swallowed hard, his composure cracking. How did you do that? Clara stood and wrote on her notepad. It's sign language, a way to speak with hands. I can teach her. And you, if you wish. Matthew read the note, his brow furrowed. Sign language, he repeated, the words foreign on his tongue. And she'll be able to communicate? Clara nodded firmly. Just then, Lily tugged on her skirt. The little girl was trying to imitate the signs, her small hands fumbling with the unfamiliar shapes. Clara knelt again, gently taking Lily's hands and helping her form the sign for hello. Lily repeated the motion on her own, and a look of pure, unadulterated joy lit up her face. My God, Matthew whispered, watching them. A sheen of moisture appeared in his eyes, and he blinked it away quickly. She's talking to you. He looked from his daughter's radiant face to Clara's calm one, and the hard lines of his expression softened into something else entirely. Something vulnerable, something grateful. Thank you, he said, and the two simple words carried the weight of a year of helpless grief. By the end of the week, the schoolhouse was buzzing with a new energy. Sign language had become a secret code the children delighted in. Lily Walsh was a different child. She attended for half days, and every day Matthew Walsh lingered a little longer at the back of the room, watching his daughter blossom. One day, Clara kept them after the other students had left for lunch. She placed her small handbell on Lily's desk. Matthew watched, confused. Clara rang the bell loudly near Lily's ear. Nothing. Then, She pressed the vibrating base of the bell against Lily's wrist. The child's eyes widened slightly. She tensed. Clara moved the bell to Lily's collarbone. Lily reached out, took the bell herself, and pressed it against her own cheek, her face a mask of pure wonder. "She can feel it," Matthew breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "The vibrations." Clara nodded, writing on her pad. "She can't hear sound, but she can experience it through touch." She tapped a rhythm on the desktop, and Lily placed her palm flat on the wood, a small smile playing on her lips. "All this time," Matthew murmured, his expression a mix of anguish and awe. "I thought she was lost in complete silence." Clara knelt beside Lily, teaching her the signs for feel and sound. Lily, in a moment of pure, innocent connection, then touched Clara's throat and shook her head questioningly. Clara felt Matthew's eyes on her. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, my voice doesn't work properly either." Lily looked at Clara, then deliberately touched her own ear and shook her head, before touching Clara's throat and repeating the gesture. The message was unmistakable. "You can't speak. I can't hear. We're the same." From behind her, Clara heard Matthew's sharp intake of breath. The simple, profound connection his daughter had just made had struck him too. Lily's face then broke into the first genuine, toothy smile Clara had ever seen from her. It was a smile that could light up the entire world. But the moment was broken by a knock at the door. It was Reverend Josiah. "I apologize for interrupting," Josiah said after Matthew and Lily had departed. "I wanted to speak with you about Walsh." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm concerned he may be developing expectations. His gratitude is profound, perhaps excessively so." Clara frowned, writing, "He has shown nothing but respect." "Matthew Walsh is a lonely, influential man," Josiah said. "You have appeared and worked a miracle with his child. It would be natural for him to conflate his gratitude with a deeper attachment. I merely counsel caution. Small towns thrive on speculation." As Josiah spoke, a harsh coughing fit seized him. When he pulled his handkerchief away, Clara saw the fresh stain of blood. Again. "It's nothing," he said dismissively. "Dust from the road." But Clara knew he was lying. Something was terribly wrong with Reverend Josiah, and his warning, as well-intentioned as it was, planted a small seed of unease. Later that day, as she walked back to her room, she was stopped by Victoria Reynolds, the wife of the town banker and the self-appointed queen of Willow Springs society. Her gaze was as sharp and cold as a winter frost. "Miss Harlow," Victoria began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you've made quite an impression on our little community, particularly on Matthew Walsh." Clara kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Walsh is grateful for his daughter's progress." "Naturally," Victoria purred. "I'm curious, though. Where did you learn this sign language? And where did you come from before this? Cheyenne, wasn't it?" She watched Clara's face like a hawk. "Curious coincidence. There was a tragic house fire in Cheyenne some years ago. A family named Wright. Only one survivor, I believe. A daughter." A cold knot formed in Clara's stomach. She forced her hand to remain steady as she wrote, "Many families have suffered such tragedies." "Indeed," Victoria said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Well, I won't keep you." Back in her room, Clara's carefully constructed peace was shattered. Victoria Reynolds was digging into her past. How long would it be before her secrets were laid bare? A knock on the door startled her. It was her landlady, Mrs. Peterson. "Telegram for you." Clara's fingers trembled as she tore it open. The message was brief and unsigned. Information about Wright family fire requested from Willow Springs. Inquirer gave no name. "Thought you should know. Someone wasn't just digging. They were getting closer." Clara held the telegram to the flame of her small stove, watching the paper curl and blacken until only ash remained. But she couldn't burn the fear that was now coiling in her gut. Her past wasn't just a ghost. It was a hunter, and it was closing in. The whispers started the next Sunday. As Clara walked to church, she saw the townsfolk gathered in small, hushed clusters. They would fall silent as she approached, their eyes following her with a new, intense curiosity. Victoria Reynolds had been busy. Inside the church, Victoria gave her a smile that was both a greeting and a threat. Just as the service began, Matthew and Lily Walsh arrived, taking a pew directly across the aisle. Matthew met her gaze and gave a brief, unreadable nod. After the service, Victoria intercepted her. "I was speaking with a friend in Cheyenne," she said, her voice pitched to Carrie. "She remembers a young woman named Wright who survived a terrible fire. Taught at the orphanage, I believe." Before Clara had to respond, Matthew was there. "Mrs. Reynolds, Miss Harlow, might I have a word about Lily's progress?" He had rescued her. "I apologize," he said once Victoria had swept away. "But you looked as if you might appreciate an escape." He followed her worried gaze to Reverend Josiah, who looked more gaunt than ever. "He's getting worse." Matthew's next words surprised her. "Would you and Lily care to join me for lunch at the hotel? We could have a chaperone, of course. I wouldn't want to compromise your position." His thoughtfulness was a balm to her frayed nerves. She accepted. The lunch was a small island of peace in her turbulent world, but as they were leaving the hotel, a tall, elegantly dressed woman approached them. "Pardon me," she said, her voice firm and cultured. "Are you Miss Harlow?" Clara nodded cautiously. "My name is Sarah Blackwood. I've come from Cheyenne on personal business." Her eyes flicked from Clara to Matthew and back again. "I was hoping we might speak. Privately." A cold dread washed over Clara. Blackwood. The name felt wrong, dangerous. This woman's arrival, so soon after the telegram, couldn't be a coincidence. That evening, Clara couldn't settle. She found herself drawn to the small cemetery at the edge of town. There, in the fading light, she did what she often did when her fears became too much to bear. She spoke to the ghosts. Her hands moved in the darkness, forming the signs. "I'm afraid. The past is following me. What if they discover the truth?" She didn't hear the footsteps on the soft grass until a shadow fell over her. She looked up, startled, to see Matthew Walsh standing a few yards away, his hat in his hands. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to intrude." He gestured to another part of the cemetery. "I was visiting my wife's grave. I saw you, and I recognized some of the signs." Mortification burned in her cheeks. He had seen her talking to the dead. "I understand," he said, his voice soft. "Sometimes words need to be spoken, even when no one can hear them." He looked at her, his eyes full of a surprising empathy. "That woman today, Miss Blackwood. She seemed to trouble you." Clara hesitated, then wrote on her pad. "I believe she has information about my past." Matthew studied her face. "Is that something you welcome?" "No," she wrote, the single word conveying a world of fear. "I came here to start new." "The past has a way of finding us, doesn't it?" he said, his voice tinged with his own old sorrows. "Some burdens are lighter when shared, Miss Harlow." He left her then, a lone figure walking through the twilight, but his words lingered. Some burdens are lighter when shared. It was a foreign concept to a woman who had carried her secrets alone for 18 years. The next afternoon, Sarah Blackwood entered the schoolhouse. She was as severe and direct as she had appeared the day before. "Thank you for meeting with me, Miss Harlow," she began. "Or should I say, Miss Wright?" Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her expression impassive. "I am your cousin," Sarah stated, her gaze unwavering. "My mother was Eleanor Wright, your father's sister. They were estranged, which is why you never knew of us." Clara wrote, her hand shaking slightly. "Why look for me now?" Sarah reached into her handbag and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. "Because I recently discovered something about the fire that claimed your family. Something you deserve to know." She spread the clipping on the desk. The fire marshal's final report concluded it was not an accident. The words seemed to leap off the page. "It wasn't your father's carelessness, Clara," Sarah said quietly. "It was arson. deliberately set, likely because of gambling debts he had accumulated. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. All these years, she had carried the guilt, believing her father's drinking and her own silence had caused their deaths. But it was murder. "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice dropping. "I believe the same men who set that fire might still be looking for something. Something they believe your father had. Something valuable enough to kill for." Cold terror, sharp and real, trickled down Clara's spine. "A man came to Cheyenne last month," Sarah said, "asking questions about you, about where you might have gone." Clara was no longer just a woman with a tragic past. She was the target of killers. After Sarah left, Clara stood in the empty schoolhouse, her mind reeling. She locked the door and stepped outside, only to see a figure step out from the shadows of a large oak tree. It was Matthew. "I know you declined my offer to stay," he said, his expression worried. "But I found myself concerned." He looked at her pale face. "Your meeting brought troubling news." It wasn't a question. On impulse, Clara handed him the newspaper clipping. He read it, his brow furrowing. "Arson," he breathed. He looked at her, his eyes dark with concern. "She thinks the people responsible might still be looking for you." Clara nodded, then wrote about Sarah's warnings, about the break-ins, about the man asking questions. "The question isn't whether to stay or go," Matthew said, his voice low and steady. "It's about who to trust with the truth. Allies make dangers more manageable." She looked at him then, at the quiet strength in his face, the man who understood grief, the man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and offered not judgment, but compassion. And she made a choice. Slowly, deliberately, Clara raised her hands. She didn't reach for her notepad. She spoke to him in the only language that was truly hers. "My name was Clara Wright," she signed. "I lost my family in a fire when I was 12. I lost my voice calling for help that never came." Matthew watched her hands, his expression intense. When she finished, he didn't speak. Instead, to her utter astonishment, he raised his own hands. With slow, careful precision, he signed back. "Thank you for trusting me with your truth." The simple sentence, signed with a skill she never knew he possessed, broke something open inside of her. He had been learning. Not just for Lily, for her. He had been learning her language. Tears sprang to her eyes, and this time, she didn't try to hide them. "I've been practicing more than I let on," he admitted, a small, soft smile touching his lips. "I have excellent motivation." His gaze held hers, and in that moment, a new and unspoken language passed between them. A language of shared burdens, of unexpected trust, and the beginning of something she hadn't dared to hope for. Whatever danger was coming, she would no longer face it alone. The Harvest Social was the biggest event of the year in Willow Springs, and the town hall was filled with music and laughter. But for Clara, the air was thick with tension. Victoria Reynolds, dripping with smug satisfaction, had insisted Clara and her students give a demonstration of their sign language. It felt less like an educational exhibit and more like being put on display. As Clara stood on the small platform with Lily and a few other children, she saw him, Reverend Josiah, looking frailer than ever, leaning heavily on the arm of Dr. Parker. And across the room she saw Sarah Blackwood, her so-called cousin, watching her with an unreadable expression. And then there was Matthew. He stood near the front, his eyes on her and Lily, a silent, steady presence in the swirling crowd. After their demonstration was met with enthusiastic applause, Josiah pulled her aside. "I've spoken at length with Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice a weak whisper. "I believe her claim of family is genuine. But Clara—" He was racked by a terrible cough, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with a new urgency. "I knew your father." Clara stared at him, stunned. "I was a chaplain at the territorial prison in Laramie before you were born," Josiah confessed. "Your father, Robert Wright, was incarcerated briefly. He wasn't a bad man, but a man with a dangerous temper when he drank. We lost touch, until the fire. When you were brought to the orphanage in Cheyenne, I recognized the name. I've been watching over you ever since." The world spun. Josiah, her quiet supporter in Willow Springs, had been a secret guardian her entire life. "I tell you this now because my time is short," he said, his breath rattling in his chest. "And because the danger Miss Blackwood warns of is real. I don't know what your father had that was so valuable, but you must be vigilant." Just then, Lily tugged at Matthew's sleeve, pointing at Sarah Blackwood, who was gesturing urgently for Clara. "I apologize for the interruption," Sarah said when Clara reached her, her voice low and tense. "But I just received a telegram from Cheyenne." Clara's blood ran cold. "A man has been asking questions at the orphanage," Sarah whispered. "He described a woman of your appearance. The telegram describes him as well-dressed, middle-aged, with a distinctive scar along his jawline. The description hung in the air. A death sentence. "I believe you should leave Willow Springs," Sarah urged. "Tonight. These people killed your family. Do you really think they'll hesitate to harm others to get what they want?" The words struck Clara like a physical blow. It wasn't just her own life at stake. It was the lives of everyone in this room. Her students, Matthew, Lily. She looked across the dance floor. Matthew was now dancing with Lily, the little girl standing on his boots as he carefully guided her through the waltz. Lily's face was alight with pure joy. It was a picture of the life Clara had started to build, a life of peace and connection, a life that her presence could destroy. In that moment, she made a decision. She would not run, but she would not be reckless. She would protect what she had found here, even if it meant confronting the shadows that had haunted her for 18 years. 2 weeks passed in a state of tense vigilance. The first frost of autumn painted the town in crystalline white. Every new face in town made Clara's heart leap into her throat. Matthew had spoken quietly to the sheriff and had his own men keeping watch, but the threat felt like a constant, unseen pressure. Reverend Josiah's condition had worsened. Dr. Parker had confined him to his bed. One afternoon, after school, Clara went to see him. The parsonage was quiet, heavy with the scent of sickness and sorrow. "Clara," Josiah whispered from his bed, his voice a mere thread. "Thank you for coming." His hand felt like brittle paper in hers. "In my desk. A packet of letters. From your father. I should have given them to you sooner." Clara's pulse quickened. Letters from her father. "He got himself involved with dangerous men," Josiah rasped, his breath catching. "Men who would kill to protect their secrets." His eyes, cloudy with pain, held a desperate clarity. "The key is in the workshop, the hidden compartment, beneath the workbench." His voice faded into another terrible coughing fit. Mrs. Murray, the caretaker, ushered Clara out. Matthew was waiting for her outside. He seemed to know just by looking at her face that the end was near for Josiah. "He gave me letters from my father," she wrote on her notepad, her hand shaking. "He said my father hid something in his old workshop." "Clara," Matthew said, his voice soft, using her given name in a way that felt both intimate and solid. "Whatever these letters reveal, whatever danger follows, you are not alone in this anymore." He caught her hands in his, and for a moment, they just stood there, the unspoken feelings between them a silent, powerful current. That night, she read the letters. They painted a picture of a man spiraling into a world of crime and fear. A partnership that had started with promise had become a trap. The final letter, dated just a week before the fire, stole the breath from her lungs. "I can no longer pretend ignorance of what Harrington and Blackwood are doing. The ledgers detail everything, every bribe, every fraudulent claim. They don't know I've made copies. I've hidden the papers where no one will think to look, but I fear it's only a matter of time. Harrington and Blackwood." The same name Sarah had mentioned. Her father had evidence. Evidence that had gotten her entire family murdered. The next morning began with an urgent knock. It was Mrs. Peterson, her face grim. "It's the Reverend. He passed in the night." The news, though expected, was a hollow punch to the gut. Her secret guardian was gone. At the church during the viewing, Clara and Matthew slipped into Josiah's small, austere office. They searched frantically. It was Clara who noticed the painting behind the desk, a simple landscape in a frame that was too thick, too heavy. Behind it, a hidden compartment. Inside was a slim packet of paper, sealed with wax. Clara broke the seal. They were ledger pages, copied in her father's hand. And the names that appeared again and again were James Harrington and Edward Blackwood. Suddenly, the office door opened. Victoria Reynolds stood there, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Miss Harlow, Mr. Walsh, an unexpected place to find you both." Matthew smoothly improvised an excuse, but Victoria's gaze lingered, sharp and knowing. They had been discovered. That evening, as they examined the ledgers at Matthew's ranch, the truth became horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just fraud. It was a conspiracy of murder and corruption on a massive scale. And then, another interruption. A rider was approaching. It was Sarah Blackwood. "Thank God you're safe!" she burst out the moment she entered Matthew's study. "Harrington is in Willow Springs. He knows you're here." "We're aware," Matthew said coolly. "He confronted Miss Harlow today." "I found the ledgers," Clara wrote on her notepad, her eyes boring into Sarah. "The evidence of his crimes. With your father, Edward Blackwood." Sarah sank into a chair, the fight going out of her. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "Edward Blackwood was my father. But I had no part in his crimes. I swear it. When I learned what he'd done, I was the one who went to the authorities. It was my testimony that sent him to prison, where he died." Her story was a stunning twist. She wasn't seeking the ledgers for her family. She was seeking redemption. "Harrington was never charged," Sarah explained. "There wasn't enough evidence. But now, with those ledgers, he can finally be brought to justice." The nearest U.S. Marshal's office was in Cheyenne, a dangerous 2-day ride away. "I'll take them," Matthew said firmly. "No," Clara wrote, her decision swift and absolute. "This is my fight, my family. We go together." The intensity in her expression was undeniable. Matthew looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not just agreement, but deep admiration. "Very well," he conceded. "We leave at first light." That night, as the ranch buzzed with quiet preparations, Matthew came to her room. "Lily will be safe," he told her. "My sister will take her." He stepped closer, the space between them charged with all the things they hadn't said. "When this is over," she signed, her heart in her hands. "What then?" He raised his own hands, his movements now sure and steady. Then he signed back, "We begin. Together." She stepped forward, placing her palm flat against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. He covered her hand with his own. For 18 years she had been defined by what she had lost, her family, her voice. But in that moment, she was defined by what she had found. The next morning, as they rode out under a sky the color of steel, she knew this wasn't an escape. It was a reckoning. But as they cleared the last ridge overlooking the valley, a rifle shot cracked through the cold morning air. It wasn't a warning shot. The bullet tore through Matthew's shoulder, sending him staggering in his saddle. They had ridden straight into an ambush. James Harrington was not going to let them reach Cheyenne. He was there, on a ridge above them, the man with the scarred face. And he wasn't alone. They were surrounded. "Get down!" Matthew yelled, his voice strained with pain as he slid from his horse, pulling Clara down with him behind a cluster of rocks. Sarah scrambled for cover nearby. The ledger pages were in Clara's satchel, the key to justice, and the reason they were about to die. Harrington's men were closing in, their dark figures moving methodically through the pines. Matthew gritted his teeth, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. "I can hold them off for a while," he gasped, drawing his revolver. "You and Sarah, take the horses. Ride for the canyon. There's a narrow pass." Clara shook her head fiercely. She wasn't leaving him. Not now. Not ever. Her mind raced, the cold panic giving way to a strange, sharp clarity. She looked around. At the rocky terrain, the steep drop-off to their left, the dry timber scattered everywhere. An idea, desperate and dangerous, began to form. She grabbed Matthew's arm, her eyes intense. She began to sign, her hands moving with a speed born of adrenaline. The fire. Use the fire. He looked at her, confused. The oil lamp, she signed, pointing to the small emergency lamp tied to her saddlebag. The dry grass. The wind. Understanding dawned on Matthew's face, quickly followed by horror. Clara, no. It's too dangerous. You could be trapped. But she was already moving. Keeping low, she scuttled to her horse, untying the lamp. Her hands, the ones she had once thought ruined forever, worked nimbly. She tore a strip of cloth from her petticoat, stuffing it into the lamp's spout as a makeshift wick. She looked at Harrington and his men, now less than 100 yards away. They were taking their time, confident they had their prey trapped. Clara didn't look at Matthew. She couldn't. She simply raised her hand in a final quick sign, "Trust me." Then she lit the wick. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she hurled the burning lamp into a thick patch of dry brush downwind from their position, but directly in the path of Harrington's men. The effect was instantaneous. The dry grass and pine needles ignited with a whoosh, and the wind, which had been a gentle breeze, seemed to gust with a sudden fury. Flames leaped from the brush, climbing the trunks of the pines, creating a wall of fire that roared to life between them and their attackers. Harrington's men shouted in alarm, falling back from the unexpected inferno. The fire spread with terrifying speed, a hungry beast devouring everything in its path, creating a curtain of thick, black smoke. "Now!" Matthew yelled. He shoved Sarah toward the horses. "Go!" He turned to Clara, his face a mask of awe and terror. But Clara wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the fire, mesmerized. For the first time in 18 years, she wasn't its victim. She was its master. The fire that had taken everything from her was now saving her. Under the cover of the smoke, they mounted up and spurred their horses toward the canyon pass Matthew had described. They rode hard, the roar of the fire and the angry shouts of Harrington's men fading behind them. They didn't stop until they were miles away, their horses heaving, their faces smudged with soot. Matthew slumped in his saddle, his face pale from blood loss. "You saved us," he breathed, looking at her with an expression that went far beyond admiration. "You used the one thing you feared most." They made it to Cheyenne 2 days later, battered and exhausted, but alive. The U.S. Marshal listened to their story, his face growing grimmer as he examined the ledger pages. Warrants were issued immediately. James Harrington was captured a week later trying to flee the territory. With the ledgers as irrefutable evidence and Sarah Blackwood's testimony, he was convicted not just of fraud and corruption, but of the murder of the Wright family. Justice, after 18 long years, had finally been served. They returned to Willow Springs not as fugitives, but as heroes. The town that had once eyed Clara with suspicion now welcomed her with open arms. They rebuilt the schoolhouse, bigger and better than before. Clara Harlow, once Clara Wright, stood before her new classroom, filled with the smiling faces of her students. Lily Walsh stood beside her, no longer a silent, withdrawn child, but a bright, confident girl who now helped Clara teach the younger children the beautiful, silent language of hands. Matthew Walsh stood in the doorway, his arm in a sling, his eyes full of a love that needed no words. Clara had faced the ghosts of her past and had not been consumed. She had found her voice, not in the whisper her damaged throat could produce, but in her courage, her resilience, and in the hands that could now speak of love, of hope, and of home. Her life had been forged in fire, but like the strongest steel, she had not been broken. She had been made stronger, and her story, a story of a silence that spoke louder than any shout, was just beginning. If you believe that the strongest voices are often the ones we cannot hear, don't forget to like and subscribe, because there are a million stories of quiet courage waiting to be told.